Welcome back to our journey through Proverbs in Proverbs 1, verses 15 through 19. We're finally going to finish up this warning section before we move on to the call of Lady Wisdom, which I'm very excited about. But there's a lot still going on in this warning section. We've already had 2 videos about it, but this one I'm sure will be just as interesting. These verses, they're deep. So let's get right into it. We'll read them together. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessor. Man, you'd think after verses 8 through 14, where we've already had so much going on, that you couldn't just pack this much more wisdom into these last few sentences, but gosh, he really does. So let's start to look into these. So he repeats, my son. It's interesting. How many times has he done that? He's my son, verse 10, my son, 8, my son. Interesting. So this is actually the third one. This is the third my son in this warning passage. I don't know what to do with that, but whenever there's 3 of anything, it always should perk up your attention to say, oh, is there a reason there's 3? Maybe we can come back to that. Well, let's continue looking through this verse. Do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. Okay. So I'm seeing a connection between walk and foot, right? So as I'm reading these verses, those words are standing out to me: walk and foot, and way and paths. Okay. So these are parallel ideas, and we've seen that in some of these other verses, right? Where you give an initial idea and then you kind of give an expansion on that idea or an alternative viewpoint. But do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet, okay, the feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Okay. So as I'm looking at that, I'm seeing that these have similar ideas of walking, paths, way, feet, and then running, right? So these are contrasting ideas because he's telling you what you should do, and then he's telling you what they do. And we can get into that in a second. But then when you look into the next section, for in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. This is kind of a new idea, right? It has nothing to do with way. It has nothing to do with paths. You could maybe make a case for ambush being sort of related to paths, but overall, right, this is a new set of images, and we'll treat it like a new set of images. And then that leaves that verse 19. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. And then this is sort of that closing, powerful conclusion line. So let's take these section by section and ask the questions we need to ask. So let's start with verses 15 to 16. We have that third, my son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Okay, so as I'm reading this, I don't have a question in my mind at the moment, but I'm seeing that he's making a comparison. So I want to set this up as a comparison, right? So we have walk versus run. We have feet in both. Walk in the way with them, foot from their paths, right? So way, slash path is in both. And then for their feet run to evil, they make haste to shed blood. Okay, so my brain is starting to ask why are we making these contrasts? What are the keys here? What are the key contrasts? And the thing that really sticks out to me is the progression from walking to running and the resulting haste to shed blood. So the key image for the paths and way of the wicked is that they are making haste to shed blood, right? Which is terrible, right? And we talked about their desire for blood and all of our sort of internal desires for blood in a way, as entertainment, as ease, unjust gain in the last video. But the haste to shed blood, right? These guys are running, but they're not just running, they're running with abandon, just putting everything aside. Just they couldn't be going faster. They make haste to shed blood. Like, this is what they're pursuing with everything they have. And so his warning is not, do not run with them, do not walk with them. And not just do not walk with them, do not set your foot on their paths, right? So this is basically the way of the wicked. This is what it will come to. But he's outlining, and apparently Solomon just loves progressions, right? Which really makes a lot of sense. So few things in our lives are just, instantaneous 360-degree turns. It's like, no, there's usually little steps that get us closer and closer to a thing, whether that be good or bad. And so Solomon is saying these guys, are running as fast as they can. But before you run, you have to walk. And the walking maybe doesn't seem so bad. And before you walk, you have to start, right? You have to set foot on the paths. And he's basically saying, look, if you start, you'll finish. If you set your foot on the paths, if you begin to walk, you will eventually just be running. You'll eventually be making haste, right? And making haste to do what? To shed blood, right? To do all the things to just fulfill the sales pitch that we talked about in the last video, in the last verses. And so his contrast is, he's like, my son, you are going to walk in a way. You are going to set your foot on some kind of path, and that path is going to lead you somewhere, right? I've outlined where the path of wisdom can lead you, and now I've outlined where the path of the fool or the path of the sinner can lead you. And if you start on this path, you will find yourself suddenly, unexpectedly at the end, because this is a natural progression. That's what's crazy. This is a natural progression. Just like we would say, you have to walk before you can run, you have to crawl before you can walk, right? With the progression of a baby, who can't do anything, and then they can, move a little bit, and then they can roll, and then they can crawl, and then they can walk teeteringly, and then they can walk confidently, and then they can, get up a little speed. Well, that all just sort of happens because once you've begun on the process of learning to walk, you desire to run. Except the problem is once you learn to walk on these paths, it will shape your desires to want to run on these paths. And the end of these paths is the shedding of blood. And ultimately, that shedding of blood is their own blood, which is what we need to talk about next. So when we begin to look at verse 17 and 18, right, he's outlined this progression, where they're going. And he says, "For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives." Okay, so this verse makes me just say, okay, what exactly does this mean? Because this is the key to understanding verse 18, I think, right? "For in vain is a net set in the sight of any bird, but these men," right? So he's making a contrast. So if we don't quite understand what verse 17 is saying, we're not going to understand what verse 18 is saying. And verse 18 seems to, pack a real punch. These men lie in wait for their own blood, ambush for their own lives. This is a serious claim. And so I want to make sure I understand, well, what exactly is he saying in verse 17? So what exactly does this say? So for in vain, okay, for in vain, so vanity, in vain would be like to no purpose, to no avail, unsuccessfully, vanity has everything to do with looking good and appearances, but no substance. And so to do something in vain would be, well, it looks like you did the right thing, but it doesn't actually have any substance to it. So in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. Okay, so what's the purpose of a net? It's to catch the bird. So in vain is it set in the sight of the bird. Okay, and why is that? So in vain, forgot to write down all of those things. In vain is, unsuccessfully. I'm not sure I spelled that right. Without substance, right? The net looks good, but it isn't doing its job. And why isn't the net doing its job? In vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. The net is obviously, the net is for catching the bird, but it fails. Why does it fail? Well, let's get our little tree here. We have a little branch, and we'll put a little bird on it. Well, if I hang up a net, right here, what's the bird gonna do? It's just gonna go the other way. It's gonna go around it, right? So if the net is in its sight, it knows how to change its course, right? If the bird sees it, it can change its course, which is why, obviously, well, I say it's obvious to me now, right? You would want this net to be hidden, right? You'd want it to be amongst other trees, right? So that should the bird fly towards it, then it won't see it and it'll fly straight into it, right? That would be the hope. So if it sees it, it goes the other way. It goes around, it avoids. But if it doesn't, it goes in, right? And so if you want to be an effective hunter, you can't let the bird see. And so Solomon seems to be saying, well, these are the kind of men who put a net in the side of the bird, right? They do it to no avail. They do not catch what they are intending to catch. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Okay. So in the scenario, are the men the bird or the hunter or both? Again, I'm just trying to make sure I'm following his image because it seems so poignant, but I'm not sure I quite am making all the connections right now. So are the sinners the bird, the hunter, or both? These men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Okay, so in that context, it definitely seems like they're the hunter, but then they get caught. So they're a hunter who sets up the net and then walks into it. They say they're trying to catch a bird, but then they walk right into their own net. It's very embarrassing. But it's very real, right? Because what was the sales pitch that they had? They said, let's lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. And that's in verse 11 here, right? But then, when we come down here, Solomon is reusing their language. Lie in wait and ambush. But now, right, he's flipped the script. They're actually waiting for their own blood. They're actually ambushing their own lives. So they think they're hunting game, right? They think they're shedding the blood of the innocent. When actually, their traps, their machinations, their ambushes are all going to destroy themselves. They're going to shed their own blood, right? Which is a pretty bad hunter, right? So they can't actually even accomplish their own purposes. And it's not just that they can't accomplish their own purposes. They actually destroy themselves in attempting to accomplish these purposes. So they're the hunter who walks into their own net. They're ambushing themselves. They're destroying themselves. That's the end of these paths. And then he goes on to make a very powerful statement. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It, talking about the gain, unjust gain, takes away the life of its possessors. So when he says everyone, right, we're generalizing again. Right, we got more specific with my son, but then we started to talk about the group of sinners. But now he's reminding us, whoa. No, this is everyone. Everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. And remember, we talked about in the last video that this desire for gain without the work, right? To lie in wait, to ambush for blood, no work, entertainment, consumption. This is, of course, a desire we have. Everyone is tempted by such things. And so he's reminding us, hey, this isn't just these people who are already running down these paths. This is everyone. If you are greedy for unjust gain, you'll get it, and it will destroy you. So everyone who is greedy, right? Everyone who's desiring, and this is really interesting, right? Greedy for unjust gain. How would you define greedy? Well, the word just popped into my mind, desiring unjustly, right? Or disorderly, right? It's okay to desire things, but to be greedy for something means you desire it out of proportion. And justice has everything to do with proper proportion. And so your desiring unjustly results in an unjust gain, which results in justice against you, right? It takes away your own life, and you basically deserve it because this is the end of the path. So unjust desire, I'm gonna write that down. Unjust desire leads to unjust gain. And unjust gain takes away the life of its possessors. An unjust gain leads to death. This is Solomon's warning. Sinners have a path, just like the wise have a path that they can choose to walk down. And if you start, then you'll likely finish. And the end is the shedding of blood. It's a simple, natural progression. And the blood will not just be any old blood. It will be innocent blood, but it will be your own blood. Because you've been foolish enough to set a net in the side of the bird. And you're going to end up only catching yourself walking into your own net. And what's amazing, maybe even shocking, is that this affects everyone. Anyone can walk down this path. This can happen to anyone. And it starts, right? So this is a great question. I know I don't normally write down more notes when we highlight, but where does it start? That I should have asked this earlier. What does it mean? What does it mean to set foot? I think verse 19 is the key. Setting foot equals desiring unjustly. It's equal to the greed, right? You begin to set foot on that path when you allow your desires to run the show. When you allow your desires for these sorts of things to go out of proportion to what they should be. And remember, these desires are an inversion of the wise path, right? It's a false call to adventure and companionship, to easy adventure and companionship, to not working, to entertainment that costs someone else, to consumption, to getting valuables, and a community that isn't bound by anything. All of these are cheap knockoffs of what you actually desire. And if you allow your desire for those things, even for the good things, to grow out of proportion to the point where you are desiring them unjustly and therefore you will act on them unjustly, right? That's what it means to set foot on the path. And once your desires are running the show, that's why you'll just continue to walk, right? You'll just continue to walk and then to run. Because once your desires are in charge, what's to keep them in check? Reason? Well, they're in charge. Reason overruled, right? Wisdom overruled my desires. They're in charge. And my desires haven't been trained by wisdom yet. That's why it just eventually leads to death. It takes away the life of its possessors. But there is a hope there, I think. It takes away the life of its possessors. There's a progression there too. It takes away. Takes is a present tense verb. Now, I don't know Hebrew very well, or at all, actually. But a present tense verb and a present progressive verb tend to be the same thing and are often affected by context. And so if possessing unjust gain takes away your life, it may not be happening in a snap, right? It may be more like a draining, right? Like it's decaying you. Which means, who does it decay? Its possessor. Well, what if you don't possess it? Well, then it won't decay you. You have the option to give it up. So yes, you can walk into your own net. And where does it start? It starts with that unjust desire that leads to unjust gain, that leads to death. But praise God that such things don't have to be permanent. Because if you stop possessing it, if you give it up, right, then you have a new chance at life. So even in Solomon's solemn warning, there's a hope that even those who have started on the path, even those who are making haste to shed blood, who are being destroyed by their own gain and by their own machinations, have a chance to be turned around, have a chance to give up what's destroying them, and so then have a chance at salvation, for their life to be truly transformed. There's always hope. That's good. Well, thank you for joining me again for this section. In the next video, we'll start the call of Lady Wisdom, and this will take on an entirely new tone that I'm really looking forward to. So, hope to see you there.